This is Atomic Biscuits, and I'm your host, BACFA. Welcome to another episode of Atomic Biscuits. This is 2024-12-15 Deck the Cards. We'll start out over at Breitbart.com in our news review. Biden gave Iran $10 billion in sanctions relief days after Trump won election. This is by Joel B. Pollack. The outgoing Biden-Harris administration gave Iran $10 billion in sanctions relief just days after Donald Trump won the 2024 presidential election, despite Iran's ongoing attacks against Israel and support for terrorist organizations. The Washington Free Beacon reported Secretary of State Antony Blinken determined on November 8th that it is in the national security interest of the United States to waive mandatory economic sanctions that bar Iraq from transferring upward of $10 billion to Iran in electricity import payments. Though the first Trump administration did greenlight the same waiver, causing tension with some congressional Republicans, it narrowly tailored the waiver to restrict Iranian access to the cash. The Biden State Department tweaked the waiver last year to allow Tehran to convert the funds from Iraqi dinars to euros, then hold those euros in bank accounts based in Oman. Access to a widely traded currency like the euro enables Iran to more easily spend the cash in international markets. Under the first Trump administration, Iran had to keep the cash in an escrow account in Baghdad, making it more difficult to access. The Biden State Department maintains that Iran is only permitted to use the funds for humanitarian needs, including medicines and other supplies. Republican critics argue that money is fungible, meaning that Tehran will have an easier time diverting its dwindling cash reserves to its regional terror proxies such as Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthi rebels in Yemen, should it have access to the sanctioned cash for other purposes. The sanctions waiver also comes just days after the United Nations determined that Iran was able to give the Houthi rebels in Yemen unprecedented support after the Biden administration waived $6 billion in sanctions on Iran. The Houthi rebels attacked global commercial shipping through the Red Sea and have launched ballistic missiles at Israeli population centers. Biden delisted the Iranian-backed rebels as a terrorist group upon taking office in 2021. I think it's interesting that we're having an echo of Obama here. You know, the JV team, the people who we shouldn't worry about, the Islamic State that's just, some caliphate over there with some people who really can't do anything. That's really not true. We can see this happening in Syria under our very noses. And we can see how important it is for American elections. I think this was something that we covered and underscored multiple times, but I think we see it illustrated here when Hillary was so desperate to become president or to maintain power. It has to do with the power of the presidency to wave away the consequences of behavior, outrunning those consequences. Well, we're seeing that now. Not only has Biden commuted the sentence and pardoned his son, which is just astounding, but also we see this article from Newsweek.com. Biden commutes 1,500 sentences, the most pardons by a U.S. president in a day. I think this is just the tip of the iceberg. There's probably a lot hiding under the surface here in those 1,500, and we'll have time to dig in. This article is by Shamim Chowdhury. U.S. President Joe Biden has commuted the sentences of around 1,500 people who were released from prison to home confinement during COVID-19, marking the largest single-day clemency action in the country's modern history. Biden also pardoned 39 people convicted of nonviolent crimes in an effort to promote second chances and address the problems with the nation's criminal justice system. The commutations announced on Thursday affect those who have served at least 1 year under home confinement and after being released from prison to reduce the spread of the virus. U.S. prisons became hotspots for COVID-19, with 1 in 5 prisoners testing positive at the height of the crisis. Why has the president commuted the sentences of so many people? Biden framed the decision as a crucial step in restoring dignity and opportunity to those who have shown remorse and made efforts towards rehabilitation. He said America was built on the promise of possibility and second chances. As president, I have the great privilege of extending mercy to people who have demonstrated remorse and rehabilitation, restoring opportunity for Americans to participate in daily life and contribute to their communities. The 39 people pardoned include those convicted of nonviolent offenses, including drug crimes. Among them are a woman who led emergency response teams during natural disasters, a church deacon who became an addiction and youth counselor, and a decorated military veteran, according to the White House. The move marks the largest single-day clemency action in modern U.S. history. The second largest clemency action was by Barack Obama when he issued 330 commutations in his final days in office. Biden's focus on nonviolent offenders and those who have turned their lives around aligns with his stated broader commitment to criminal justice reform. His actions come amid mounting pressure from advocates and lawyers for a broader use of his pardon power. Human rights organizations also are urging Biden to commute the sentences of those on federal death row, an issue that remains contentious as some fear that executions could resume under a future administration. While Biden's Attorney General, Merrick Garland, has put a hold on federal executions, the resumption of the death penalty remains a looming concern, especially given Trump's record of overseeing executions during his presidency. Biden has pledged to continue reviewing clemency petitions, signaling that additional pardons and commutations could follow before he leaves office on January 20th. The decision to grant clemency has sparked debate over whether Biden should issue preemptive pardons for those involved in the investigations of Trump's efforts to overturn the 2020 election results. Added to this, his decision to pardon his son Hunter for gun and tax crimes has also fueled public debate. Though Biden had long promised not to use his clemency power for family members, he reversed course, arguing that the prosecution was politically motivated. That move has drawn mixed reactions, with some criminal justice advocates expressing frustration over what they see as preferential treatment. According to a recent poll by the AP NORC Center for Public Affairs Research, only about 2 in 10 Americans support Biden's decision to pardon his son. Again, that's over at Newsweek.com. There has been a terrific amount of coverage over Luigi Mangione and his attack in New York in the middle of the street in a day. I think a lot of people have talked about how similar this annihilator with a manifesto appears to so many other wind-up toy soldiers that have been programmed to take specific action. And, you know, this entire conversation about the hot killer is not new. I can remember hearing this when we investigated the Boston bombing for those young men who had been maneuvered into place to take specific action. It's not unlike other toys we've seen. He's generally from the Anne Arundel area. Again, we got Baltimore crime families. We've got Maryland in the mix. H.I. in the name of the hostile, and he was from Hawaii. I think we are seeing them setting the stage for some mental defect defense. That's pretty standard stuff. Maryland is home to a naval base. He seems to have a problem with certain types of structures, and hypnotherapists always seem to show up splitting personalities of vulnerable people and turning them into killers. There's just more here than what the mainstream media will cover. However, they've convicted him already. We have this article over at bbc.com. Luigi Mangione fingerprints match crime scene prints, police say. And I believe since this article was posted, there has been more information about the weapon used, the ghost gun, all that good stuff. Police have found a positive match between the fingerprints of a suspect accused of fatally shooting healthcare insurance CEO Brian Thompson in New York to those discovered at the scene of the crime. Fingerprints found on a water bottle and a protein bar near the crime scene matched those of 26-year-old Luigi Mangione, who was arrested in Pennsylvania on Monday after a nearly week-long manhunt, NYPD Commissioner Jessica Tisch said on Wednesday. It marks the first forensic link tying Mr. Mangione to the healthcare executive's murder outside a Manhattan hotel a week ago. The gun Mr. Mangione was carrying when he was arrested also matches shell casings from the crime scene. Mr. Mangione was arrested on Monday after being spotted at a McDonald's in Altoona, Pennsylvania, where he is being held on gun-related charges as he fights extradition to New York to face murder charges. He's pleading not guilty to those offenses, a lawyer said in relation to the Pennsylvania charges, adding, "I haven't seen any evidence that he is the shooter." U.S. states have different laws and judicial systems, and the process involved in the transfer of fugitives could take days or weeks. Mr. Mangione's arrest follows a days-long manhunt that spanned several states. He was allegedly found with a gun similar to the murder weapon, a silencer, and a fake ID. 3 handwritten pages were allegedly also in his possession. New York police said they took these to be a claim of responsibility in Mr. Thompson's fatal shooting since they appeared to record frustrations with the U.S. healthcare system. The United Healthcare chief executive, 50, was gunned down by a masked man outside a Manhattan hotel in what authorities have called a targeted attack. Mr. Mangione was denied bail for a second time on Tuesday after prosecutors said he was too dangerous to be released. The judge then gave prosecutors 30 days to seek a warrant from New York Governor Kathy Hochul to secure his extradition to the state. Hochul later said she would provide one. "I am coordinating with the district attorney's office and will sign a request for a governor's warrant to ensure this individual is tried and held accountable," she said. Defense lawyers also have a 2-week window in which to submit motions against Mr. Mangione being moved to New York. The challenge was described by a Pennsylvania prosecutor as creating more hoops to jump through. Mr. Mangione looked around at the rows of reporters in court and smiled at times. At one point, he interrupted his own lawyer, who quickly quieted him. Following the hearing on Tuesday afternoon, that lawyer, Thomas Dickey, spoke to reporters outside court. "You can't rush to judgment in this case or any case," he said. "He's presumed innocent. Let's not forget that." Mr. Dickey reiterated his position to ABC News on Wednesday, saying he was not aware of any evidence that linked Mr. Mangione's gun with the crime. "A lot of guns look the same," he added. As for handwritten pages, Mr. Dickey conceded that they certainly could be evidence, but added, "I haven't seen any of that yet." Mr. Mangione has been charged with several offenses in Pennsylvania, including providing fraudulent identification to police and possessing an unlicensed firearm. He's being held at a Pennsylvania state prison and will plead not guilty. In New York, he faces separate charges, including murder for Mr. Thompson's killing on the 4th of December. Mr. Thompson was named chief executive of the company, which is the largest private insurer in the United States, in April 2021. He had received threats before his death related to medical coverage, according to his widow, Paulette Thompson, but a motive for his killing has not been suggested by prosecutors. On Tuesday, however, as police poured through evidence and worked to piece together Mr. Mangione's movements after the shooting, more details emerged about his alleged grievances with the health insurance industry. New York Police Department Chief of Detectives Joseph Kinney told Good Morning America he had read a 3-page handwritten note allegedly found on the suspect when he was arrested. "He does make some indication that he's frustrated with the healthcare system in the United States," he said. He was writing a lot about his disdain for corporate America and in particular the healthcare industry. The note, which has been seen by several U.S. media outlets, reportedly refers to parasites that had it coming. He also allegedly writes that he acted alone. Former friends who spoke to the BBC said Mr. Mangione had suffered from a back injury. They said he had left a surfing community in Hawaii over the summer of 2023 to undergo spinal surgery. R.J. Martin, a former roommate of the suspect who knew him in Hawaii, said the injury prohibited him at times from just doing many normal things. Various details of Mr. Mangione's background have surfaced since his arrest. He was born in Maryland to a wealthy, well-known family, and police say he has ties to San Francisco. His last known address was in Honolulu, Hawaii. He attended the University of Pennsylvania, an Ivy League college where he earned a bachelor's and a master's degree in software engineering. Local media reported that Mr. Mangione's mother had reported him missing last month, telling authorities in San Francisco that she had not heard from her son since July. Our family is shocked and devastated by Luigi's arrest, Mr. Mangione's family said in a statement posted on social media by his cousin. We offer our prayers to the family of Brian Thompson, and we ask people to pray for all involved. Yeah, I think we can see through the surface of this story just a little bit that there's definitely more going on here. This BBC.com story was written by Jessica Parker in Pennsylvania and Nadine Youssef. Over at dailycaller.com, at this article, Daniel Penny stands by his actions, says he'd face court a million times to save others. It's in stark contrast to the last story from Heroic America. This is by Marianne Angela. Former Marine Daniel Penny said Tuesday that he stands by his actions on a New York City subway despite enduring years of harsh criticism. During an interview with Judge Jeanine Pirro on The Five, that's a Fox show, Penny revealed his motivations and said he intervened to prevent potential harm as he prioritizes the safety of others over his personal comfort with the public and media attention. He added that he would endure 1 million court appearances and the hatred and name-calling that comes with them if it meant preventing even one person from coming to harm. This type of thing is very uncomfortable. All this attention and limelight is very uncomfortable. I would prefer without it. I didn't want any type of attention or praise, and I still don't. The guilt I would have felt if someone did get hurt, if he did do what he was threatening to do, I would never be able to live with myself, Penny told Pirro when she asked him what made him choose to get involved. And there's a link to the recording here at this article as well. Penny also touched on the broader implications of his experience and criticized the policies of liberal city leaders, which he believes contributed to the subway incident. These public officials would do something so self-serving, these political gain, these are their policies, and I don't mean to get political or make enemies, although I guess I have already, Penny said. The Manhattan court found Penny not guilty on Monday after the jury dismissed a charge of second-degree manslaughter last week when they could not reach a unanimous verdict. Penny subdued 30-year-old Jordan Neely in May 2023 with a chokehold after Neely began exhibiting erratic behavior on a New York City subway. Law enforcement sources and witnesses on the F train described Neely as yelling and acting unpredictably, prompting passengers to feel threatened. According to prosecutors, Penny maintained the chokehold on Neely for around 6 minutes. Penny's lawyer, attorney Thomas Kenneth, previously said he was confident that a Manhattan jury would focus solely on the facts, not racial issues, despite a recent refusal to dismiss the case. Again, that's over at dailycaller.com. No review of this week's news would be complete without talking about the fall of Syria. This seemed to happen while we were having Sunday Long Live last week, where we saw Assad's plane disappear from radar. And then there was much speculation about how it had been shot down, how ISIS was in control. No, he's back at home. No, he's in Russia talking to Putin. It was a very chaotic story that the mainstream media had a very hard time getting quality information about. This was posted a little bit later in the week. This is from Breitbart.com. Assad regime collapse could leave Russia without critical access to Mediterranean. I think it's really important for us to look at these big moving pieces in the mechanism that makes up the machine of the world. There is always resource at the underpinning. It's a big game of risk. Russia may lose its base at the Syrian port of Tartus after the fall of dictator Bashar Assad, which would deprive the Russians of their only fueling port on the Mediterranean Sea and cripple Moscow's ability to threaten the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, NATO, from the south. Newsweek on Monday quoted military analysts who saw signs of Russian forces pulling away from Tartus early in the rebel advance last week. Ukrainian intelligence said Russia has withdrawn its warships from the port, including a patrol ship and a dry cargo ship. Satellite photography further showed two Russian naval vessels, the frigate Admiral Gorshkov and an auxiliary vessel, heading back to Russia from the Mediterranean. This would suggest the Russians do not feel comfortable about using the base at Tartus, at least for the time being. The Russian Navy had 5 naval vessels and a submarine based at Tartus before the lightning-fast rebel insurgency broke out less than 2 weeks ago. The auxiliary ship spotted on its way back to Russia, the Yelnya, is an oiler whose functions would be indispensable to operating the other surface vessels. Russia built the Tartus base in 1977, stopped using it after the Soviet Union fell, and resumed activities in 2015 when Moscow intervened in the Syrian civil war to save Assad. Russia signed a 49-year lease for the base with the Assad regime in 2019, an agreement that was hailed at the time as a major step toward building a permanent military and economic relationship with Syria. The Tartus naval base became even more important after Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022 because Moscow needed NATO to feel vulnerable along its southern flank. The Russians actually wanted to shift most of their Mediterranean fleet into the Black Sea to help against Ukraine, but Turkey refused to allow them to pass through the Dardanelles and Bosporus Straits. Russia contented itself with using its trapped Mediterranean warships to threaten NATO by making the Mediterranean risky for aircraft carriers. The Russians also appear to be abandoning their air base at Khmeimim in Latakia province. Russia built the base in 2015 as a sign of its commitment to the Assad regime and signed a 49-year lease for the property in 2017. Russia used the base to provide air support for its mercenary operations in Africa, in addition to helping the Syrian army suppress insurgent groups, making the air base strategically vital to Moscow. Khmeimim is only about 20 miles from the ground the insurgents covered in their swift march to Damascus, and it's been menaced with rocket and drone attacks in the past, so it would have seemed especially vulnerable to Russian military planners. The Kremlin officially claims the fleet based at Tartarus is merely conducting large-scale naval exercises rather than abandoning the port. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov said on Monday that Russian officials are taking necessary steps to establish contact in Syria with those capable of ensuring the security of military bases. Other Kremlin sources told Russian state media that Syrian opposition leaders have given assurances that Russia's military bases and diplomatic facilities will not be molested. There is some evidence to support those claims, as Russia's embassy in Damascus was left alone while gunmen stormed the Iranian embassy on Sunday. Iran, like Russia, fought in Syria on behalf of the Assad regime. Iranian state media tried to spin the humiliating embassy attack by claiming the gunmen were not from Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS, the al-Qaeda offshoot that led the insurgency to victory. Again, that's over at Breitbart.com. Knowing about the access to the to the Black Sea, and all that Red October stuff, it is important in the Russian military strategy. Access to the Mediterranean, access to water, these are all pretty key. The fact that this clips some wings in the Ukrainian conflict cannot be underscored. There is a lot happening in this area, and military strategists take note and report on these things quite frequently. But when we don't hear things, I think that's what tells us the real deal is happening. It will not be broadcast, right? It's going to be over by the time we hear about it. So keeping our ear to the rail and sort of feeling the vibrations of other things happening help give us some indicator of what we should be paying attention to, and perhaps give us some indicator of what is to come. At this point, it's very difficult to quote unquote trust Ray about anything. Again, there's probably all kinds of machinations that we don't quite understand yet, but in retrospect, we will. This story comes from thehill.com. Grassley tells Ray it's time to move on for the good of the country. Horn and calm look a lot alike when they're typed out. Just saying. Incoming Senate Judiciary Chair Chuck Grassley, Republican from Iowa, told FBI Director Christopher Wray on Monday he has a vote of no confidence in his leadership, saying it's time for him to move on. The 11-page listing of grievances from Grassley signals his support for President-elect Trump to fire Wray, who became the FBI director in 2017 after his nomination by then-President Trump. Wray is serving a 10-year term that would keep him in the post until 2027, should Trump decide not to remove him. Quote, for the good of the country, it's time for you and your deputy to move on to the next chapter in your lives, end quote, Grassley. Faulting Wray for hindering his work by failing to respond to requests and having prevented the truth on some issues from ever reaching the American people. Trump has announced his intention to nominate Kash Patel as FBI director. Grassley held off on supporting Patel for this role. I therefore must express my vote of no confidence in your continued leadership of the FBI. President-elect Trump has already announced his intention to nominate a candidate to replace you, and the Senate will carefully consider that choice. For my part, I've also seen enough, and I hope your respective successors will learn from these failures, Grassley concluded. The FBI did not immediately respond to a request for comment. Grassley framed the letter as an opportunity to tell you where you went wrong for the benefit of the Bureau and that of your successor. Much of the letter complains about how the FBI handled the investigations into President-elect Trump and Hillary Clinton, matters that predated Wray's leadership of the FBI. Grassley also criticized the search of Trump's home ahead of the Justice Department bringing its classified documents case against him, complaining that no such raid took place at Hillary Clinton's premises, even though she and her staff mishandled highly classified information. Grassley complained that no such raid occurred at President Biden's house during his classified documents probe. Biden, however, was the one who alerted authorities to the documents, whereas Trump resisted multiple times when asked to return the records recovered from his home. Grassley pointed to information he disclosed that was provided by an FBI informant claiming that Biden accepted a bribe. The informant, Alexander Smirnov, was later arrested and charged with providing false information to the Bureau. Smirnov allegedly fabricated the story due to political animosity toward Biden, but his claims nonetheless were central to a House GOP investigation into the Biden family. The FBI, under your watch, however, had possession of incriminating information against President Biden for 3 years until I exposed the existence of the record outlining those allegations, but did nothing to investigate it, Grassley wrote in his letter. The Bureau, however, does appear to have investigated the matter as it serves as the basis of the false statement charges against Smirnov, who has also since been indicted on tax charges. Again, another just barely scratching the surface story, but this is over at thehill.com. Some weeks the news feels like that scene from the Addams Family movie where they go wake the dead. Hey, wake up, it's time to get up. Because we start to hear names we haven't heard in a while. And this name is John Bolton. Yeah, we had video of him walking on some foreign street when he was supposed to be an international player. This article is Kash Patel Doesn't Belong at the FBI, and it was posted in the opinion section of the Wall Street Journal. At the NSC, he was less interested in his assigned duties than in proving his loyalty to Donald Trump. So, I mean, you can see we got ourselves a smear job right here in one of these papers of record. The president's constitutional obligation to take care that the laws be faithfully executed requires even-handed action in the national rather than the personal interest, a distinction Donald Trump doesn't grasp. His oft-stated intention to seek retribution against opponents, if implemented, facially contravenes the take care clause. Too many of Mr. Trump's personnel selections evidence his assiduous search for personal fealty, not loyalty to the Constitution. Kash Patel's nomination as director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation squarely fits this pattern. Representative Devin Nunes pushed Mr. Patel for the National Security Council staff after Republicans lost the House in 2018. Notwithstanding Mr. Patel's lack of policy credentials, the president ordered him hired. NSC staff has long been divided into directorates responsible for different policy areas. Charles Cooperman, my deputy, and I placed Mr. Patel in the International Organizations Directorate, which had a vacancy. Some 5 months later, we moved him to fill an opening in the Counterterrorism Directorate. In neither case was he in charge of a directorate during my tenure as National Security Advisor or thereafter, as he contends in his memoir and elsewhere. He reported to senior directors in both cases and had defined responsibilities. His puffery was characteristic of the resume inflation we had detected when Mr. Trump pressed him on us. We found he had exaggerated his role in cases he worked on as a Justice Department lawyer before joining Mr. Nunes' committee staff. Given the sensitivity of the NSC's responsibilities, problems of credibility or reliability would ordinarily disqualify any job applicant. He proved to be less interested in his assigned duties than in worming his way into Mr. Trump's presence. Fiona Hill, NSC Senior Director for Europe, testified to Congress during Mr. Trump's first impeachment hearings that Mr. Patel, at the time assigned to the International Organizations Directorate, participated in a May 2019 Oval Office meeting on Ukraine, and that he had engaged in various other Ukraine-related activities. Whatever he did on Ukraine while an NSC staffer, at least during my tenure, was unrestrained freelancing. He has denied any communication with Mr. Trump on Ukraine. In August 2019, when I was overseas, Mr. Trump called Mr. Cooperman and White House counsel Pat Cipollone to the Oval Office. They arrived to find Mr. Patel already there. The subject of the discussion was making him an administration enforcer of presidential loyalty. Messrs. Cipollone and Cooperman strongly objected to any such role, whether in the NSC or the counsel's office, and the issue disappeared. I resigned in September 2019. According to former Defense Secretary Mark Esper's memoir, during an October 2020 hostage rescue mission, Mr. Patel, then in the Counterterrorism Directorate, misinformed other officials that a key airspace transit clearance had been granted. In fact, Mr. Esper writes the clearance hadn't been obtained, threatening the operation's success, and his team suspected Patel made the approval story up, but wasn't certain. Typically, Mr. Patel's version of this episode in his memoir denies any error, though ironically it also boasts of his acting beyond the authority of NSC staffers. Then Secretary of State Mike Pompeo also knew the day's details, including about the clearance issue. He hasn't spoken publicly about the incident. He should. Last week, Olivia Troye, who served as counterterrorism advisor to Vice President Mike Pence, elaborated on these concerns, tagging Mr. Patel with making things up on operations and lying about intelligence. His lawyers responded by threatening to sue her for defamation, writing that at no point did Mr. Patel ever lie about national intelligence. place Navy SEALs at risk, or misinform the vice president. What Mr. Esper and Ms. Troye accused Mr. Patel of lying about is the airspace transit clearance, the lack of which would have made transit by U.S. forces through the airspace of the country in question an act of war. These are but a few of many cases that touch directly on Mr. Patel's character and his consistent approach of placing obedience to Mr. Trump above other higher considerations, most important, loyalty to the Constitution. His conduct in Mr. Trump's first term and thereafter indicates that as FBI director, he would operate according to Laurenti Beria's reported comment to Joseph Stalin, "Show me the man, and I'll show you the crime." Mr. Patel has frequently called for investigations of journalists, comments he has since tried to walk back. He has been accused of seeking to declassify sensitive information for political rather than legitimate national security reasons. During Mr. Trump's first term, both Attorney General William Barr and Central Intelligence Agency Director Gina Haspel threatened to resign if Mr. Patel was forced on them as Deputy FBI or CIA Director, respectively. Mr. Trump claims to have been unfairly, even illegally targeted by partisan Biden prosecutors. That may or may not be true. But if illegitimate partisan prosecutions were launched, those responsible should be held accountable in a reasoned, professional manner, not in a counter-witch hunt. The worst response is for Mr. Trump to engage in the prosecutorial conduct he condemns. Simply threatening to do so politicizes and degrades the legal process and the American people's faith in even-handed law enforcement. A president possessed of civic virtue wouldn't launch retribution against opponents, and he certainly wouldn't appoint an FBI director who saw himself solely as the president's liege man. If Mr. Trump is determined wrongly to remove Christopher Wray as FBI director, there are previous examples of appointees who restored faith in a battered Justice Department and FBI. In 1975, President Gerald Ford selected Edward Levi, Dean of the University of Chicago Law School, as Attorney General. In 1978, President Jimmy Carter named Judge William Webster, a Republican, to be FBI Director. Mr. Patel is no Ed Levi, nor Bill Webster. To resolve questions over his integrity and fitness, a full-field FBI investigation, as prior nominees have undergone, is warranted. With more facts available and less rhetoric, the result will be clear. I regret I didn't fully discern Mr. Patel's threat immediately, but we are now all fairly warned. Senators won't escape history's judgment if they vote to confirm him. The fear, the absolute fear that we're smelling out of D.C. and its apparatus is amazing. Just the nomination of putting cash in place to clean out the FBI is terrifying them. They know the jig is up, right? They know that someone who has inside information, who was acting at the pleasure of the president, is going to go in there and take care of business. And this is happening across the federal bureaucracy. No place to hide, no revolving door to escape into a segment of the federal bureaucracy to hide until they can reemerge. That's the whole point. That's what we're seeing, is this huge sunlight of Doge and other things. And just nominating these people. They're not even in place yet, and the rats are scurrying. I think it's also important to remember that, kind of like in 007, where you're acting on his or her Majesty's Secret Service, when someone joins the Navy, they can then be engaged in secret activities by being directed by the president as well. So I often thought that this was going to get employed in covering Hunter Biden's crimes, that he was actually acting on behalf of the country. I mean, he was shopping out Ukrainian assets as, hey, guess what, FBI? Guess what, CIA? We can use this as a way to get at, So all this nefarious money laundering with Burisma and all had a reason, right? There was some deeper logistical reason why it would be legitimate, and that because he was acting under official acts of a president, that he would not be held accountable for those things because he's on a mission. That's informative. I think going forward, we will see that this has been going on in prior administrations as well. I think that we will see that there have been people who were activated because they were former military, even if only briefly, to do certain things that help position administrations and people either in positions of authority or lock them back on their heels. I think there's also, and yes, I believe in the 3D chess. I do believe that some people are pushed into positions simply so that the media and others will investigate them. They are promoted as friendlies when actually the idea here is to expose them for the frauds that they are and for the crimes that they've committed. And then, they fall apart and they're moved out of place and the next one is pushed into position. This is a cycle of cleaning. And we have very limited time to really push out the cancer. We've got to carve it all out at one time, lop it off, and then we've got to keep it from coming back. So anyway, I thought that was an interesting bit of just couldn't keep it to himself, had to get it out there, and felt like he had to put it in public to warn everybody that Kash Patel is not going to work for him or many of the people there. I imagine there's a lot of evidence being shredded, burned, moved, destroyed, hidden, because a lot of people are going to go to jail or worse. All right, let's pivot for just a second to other parts of the world. There's an article over at recordedfuture.com, Breaking the Circle. Chinese Communist Party propaganda infrastructure rapidly expands. This is posted by the Insect Group. China is rapidly advancing its global propaganda strategies through international communication centers, that's ICCs, with over 100 centers established since 2018, most since 2023. These centers aim to amplify the Chinese Communist Party's, the CCP's, voice on the international stage, targeting specific audiences with tailored messaging, a strategy known as precise communication. ICCs coordinate local, national, and international resources to build China's image, share political narratives, and promote economic partnerships. By leveraging inauthentic social media amplification, foreign influencers, and collaborations with overseas media, ICCs advance China's multi-layered propaganda approach. For instance, Fujian's ICC reportedly manages TikTok accounts targeting Taiwanese audiences, likely including a covert account that is highly critical of the Taiwan government called 2TX. On YouTube, the same ICC promotes videos of Taiwanese individuals praising China. These centers are strategically positioned to promote China's interests during geopolitical crises, despite challenges like limited credibility and resource constraints. China's efforts to reshape global narratives about its policies, culture, and geopolitical aims have reached new heights with the rapid proliferation of international communications centers. Established to amplify the voice of Chinese Communist Party, these centers are integral to China's global propaganda apparatus and seek to propel the CCP's precise communication strategy for targeting distinct audiences. Here's a closer look at their functions, strategies, and implications. ICCs are propaganda hubs designed to bring new resources to the CCP's efforts to tell China's story, centralizing and streamlining the capabilities of provinces, cities, and smaller jurisdictions. These centers focus on building China's global image by sharing positive narratives about its culture, economy, and development. Simultaneously, they act as a conduit for political narratives aimed at countering negative perceptions and promoting China's geopolitical agenda. Over 100 ICCs have been established across China, primarily since 2023, under provincial and sub-provincial propaganda departments and state media organizations. These centers aim to break the circle, to penetrate foreign audiences, and tailoring content for specific regions and demographics. ICCs primarily aim to promote positive narratives about China. They create content that highlights the country's cultural heritage, technological innovations, and economic progress, fostering goodwill among international audiences. Additionally, ICCs counter negative narratives by responding to perceived anti-China sentiments and disseminating content to influence public opinion on geopolitical topics. By tailoring their approaches to specific regions and demographics, ICCs strive to ensure their narratives resonate more effectively. For example, Fujian's ICC specifically targets Taiwanese audiences using TikTok accounts that blend cultural themes with critical political messaging. ICCs employ various tactics to achieve their objectives. Social media operations form a core component of their strategy, with thousands of accounts active across platforms like Facebook, YouTube, and TikTok. Many of these accounts lack transparency about their state affiliations, enabling covert influence campaigns. Additionally, ICCs leverage foreign influencers and communication officers to amplify China's narratives through user-generated content, vlogs, and experiential propaganda. Collaboration with overseas media organizations further enhances ICC's reach and legitimacy through actions like organizing foreign journalist visits to China. ICCs create an impression of organic coverage and offer an alternative to Western narratives. These partnerships, reportedly established in Australia, Brazil, Cambodia, Egypt, France, Japan, Russia, and the United States and elsewhere, are complemented by localized propaganda activities that align with China's economic and geopolitical interests. Despite ambitious goals, ICCs face significant challenges that hinder their effectiveness. These include a lack of professional and foreign talent, insufficient discourse power, inadequate data for precise communication, and inconsistent funding. ICCs often struggle to translate local developments into effective narratives for foreign audiences and lack focus on target demographics. Many rely heavily on central state media infrastructure, as seen with the Nanning International Communications Center, outsourcing key operations to Xinhua News Agency. These limitations echo long-standing issues within China's state media sector. ICCs represent a sophisticated evolution in China's propaganda efforts. While they are unlikely to become trusted sources of information in the near term, their ability to amplify preferred narratives during geopolitical crises is likely significant. These centers likely have the potential to influence foreign opinion of China by offering regular engagement, providing alternatives to Western sources, and focusing on topics like quality of life in China rather than political values, especially among Global South and Western periphery audiences. The expansion of international communication centers reflects China's ongoing efforts to innovate its media strategy, centralize resources, and project global narratives favoring its interests under Xi Jinping's leadership. Despite challenges, ICCs likely strengthen China's ability to influence global discourse by leveraging thousands of overt and covert social media accounts and fostering collaborations with foreign media. These centers could amplify assertive messaging during crises and suppress negative coverage of China. China's long-term goal is almost certainly to establish ICC-affiliated platforms as trusted sources of information. While this remains unlikely in the near term due to credibility challenges, ICCs represent a strategic step toward improving China's external propaganda system. Researchers and governments should prioritize tracking ICC activities and advocating for transparent labeling of their state affiliations on social media platforms. There's an entire analysis that you can download from a link here as a PDF as well. I know this is a little wonkish, but the thing is, we should be looking at these sorts of collaborations across all sorts of things. It's not just China with social media platforms. It's not just China with news organizations, which is bad enough. It's also China with educational centers, with Ivy League colleges, with medical systems. There is a investment that looks like infestation. And when our media is referred to as commie-cast, that's no accident. We really have to be guarded, and we need to be looking at this mechanism because it's not just China using it. We have everybody has got a vested influence and outcomes. So whether the West is using it, whether it's Russia using it, whether it's China using it, we need to be thinking about what is the source of this quote unquote mental food. Is it good for me? Is it cotton candy? Does it have meat on the bones? Is it poison? So those are all things we need to ask ourselves. Should it have a warning label on the outcome on the outer wrapper? Because that's what we would expect from most products. But rarely are we thinking about that in terms of our news product. Sarah A. Carter staff posted, federal judge halts Biden plans to open Obamacare to illegal migrants enrolled in DACA. This is over at sarahacarter.com. Breitbart News reports a federal judge has halted President Joe Biden's plans to open the Affordable Care Act, known as Obamacare, to illegal aliens enrolled in the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, or DACA, program. On Monday, District Judge Daniel Traynor granted a preliminary injunction and stay to ensure that Biden's agencies cannot implement such plans while the issue makes its way through federal court. The case comes after Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris, in May of this year, announced a final rule to open Obamacare rolls to some DACA illegal aliens enrolled in the program. DACA was created by President Barack Obama, first via executive order. This decision is a big win for the rule of law, Kansas Attorney General Chris Kobach, Republican, who led the lawsuit, said in a statement. Congress never intended that illegal aliens should receive Obamacare benefits. Indeed, 2 laws prohibit them from receiving such benefits. The Biden administration tried to break those laws, but we fought back and defeated the Biden Justice Department. Alabama, Arkansas, Idaho, Indiana, Iowa, Florida, Missouri, Montana, Nebraska, New Hampshire, North Dakota, Ohio, South Carolina, South Dakota, Tennessee, Texas, and Virginia had joined Kansas in the lawsuit against the Biden-Harris administration. This expansion of Obamacare to illegal aliens once again shows the Biden administration's contempt for the law, Immigration Reform Law Institute Executive Director Dale Wilcox said. Like DACA itself, this expansion is a usurpation of power by an executive that opposes the will of the people as expressed in duly enacted laws and arrogantly purports to rewrite the law itself, Wilcox said. We're pleased the court saw how starkly unlawful Biden's rule is and struck it down. Breitbart News notes that President-elect Donald Trump is likely to throw out the final rule once taking office in January next year. Estimations suggest that should be about 100,000 DACA illegal aliens enrolled in Obamacare and would cost the American taxpayers about $300 million annually. Other estimates have put the annual financial burden at about $2.8 billion. Again, that's over at sarahacarter.com. Wanted to wrap up with this TechCrunch article. Google says its new quantum chip indicates that multiple universes exist. This is by Julie Bort. Google on Monday announced Willow, its latest, greatest quantum computing chip. The speed and reliability performance claims Google's made about this chip were newsworthy in themselves, but what really caught the tech industry's attention was an even wilder claim tucked into the blog post about the chip. Google quantum AI founder Harmut Nevin wrote in his blog post that this chip was so mind-boggling fast that it must have borrowed computational power from other universes. Ergo, the chip's performance indicates that parallel universes exist and we live in a multiverse. Here's the passage. Willow's performance on this benchmark is astonishing. It performed a computation in under 5 minutes that would take one of today's fastest supercomputer, 1025, or 10 septillion years. If you want to write it out, there's this big long number of years. This mind-boggling number exceeds known timescales in physics and vastly exceeds the age of the universe. It lends credence to the notion that quantum computation occurs in many parallel universes, in line with the idea that we live in a multiverse, a prediction first made by David Deutsch. This drop-the-mic moment on the nature of reality was met with skepticism by some, but surprisingly, others on the internet who profess to understand these things argued that Nevin's conclusions were more than plausible. The multiverse, while stuff of science fiction, is also an area of serious study by the founders of quantum physics. The skeptics, however, point out that the performance claims are based on the benchmark that Google itself created some years ago to measure quantum performance. That alone doesn't prove that parallel versions of you aren't running around in other universes, just where the underlying measuring stick came from. Unlike classic digital computers that calculate based on whether a bit is a 0 or a 1, on or off, quantum computers rely on incredibly tiny qubits. These can be on, off, or both, somewhere in between, and they can also tap into quantum entanglement, a mysterious connection at the tiniest levels of the universe between two or more particles where their states are linked, no matter the distance that separates them. Quantum computers use such quantum mechanics to calculate highly complex problems that cannot currently be addressed with classic computers. The problem is that the more qubits used in the computer, the more prone to errors they are. So it's not clear yet if quantum computers will ever be reliable enough and powerful enough to live up to their hype. Google's mission with Willow was to reduce those errors, and Nevin says it accomplishes that. Is it spooky action at a distance? Isn't that what we've heard in the past? Or is it tapping into something else? Or is it all smoke and mirrors? These chips will process things so quickly and come to conclusions so quickly they cannot be checked by our own math or by our own thoughts. If we use things like this to go into quadrants unexplored, to explore math that doesn't make sense in our universe, okay, from a theoretical perspective, but as long as we understand that it's outside the realm of possibility, we should leave it there in the imaginary realm. We shouldn't try to incorporate it into our own 3D physical universe. Unless there is a reason to apply those sorts of unphysics, then we should leave it in the realm of fiction. Well, I want to just tell you all, I hope you're having wonderful holidays, and I hope you will tune in again next week for another episode of Atomic Biscuits. Have a great holiday season, everyone. See you back here next week on this same channel.
Thanks for joining us for Atomic Biscuits. Tune in again next week for more news and music. Check out BACFA on Gab at BACFA, as well as Bitchute, Rumble, D-Live and Odysee. Check out lastscoutradio.com for fun content. Listen to WBN 324 on radio stations around the world, on many streaming platforms, and World Broadcasting Network WBN 324.zil.